Like piercing bells amongst the rain. An old phone, rotary, rang. Its sound was eerie and off, detuned, bewildering. Something about it seemed not of this world. Running an auction house, among other things, is surprisingly a lot of work. The day had been hard on my throat, hard on my mind, and I was really getting ready to close things up and close up for the day. Unfortunately, the trials of managing stocks, crates of questionably cursed artifacts, and chasing some misfortuned burglars out had only been the beginning of the horrors. My name is Quentin Loreno. I'm somewhat of a middleman in the criminal underworld. I mediate the crime families, I arrange diplomatic marriages, I keep things civil, but above all I host auctions. Art is a tastefully wonderful medium of laundering money and hosting both underworld and legal auctions is kind of my speciality, and I also recover and sell cursed artifacts. I had been chatting with a good friend of mine over the phone when lightning snapped and cracked outside, and I found myself talking to nothing but a blank loading screen, his face superimposed, grotesque. I tapped the screen, no effect. I reloaded the page. Can you hear me? I called out, but the static image said none. Sighing, I closed the page as thunder rolled and rain beat down. He was just telling such an interesting story too, one of seizing accursed artifacts from the black market and sending them into the right hands. A daring rescue and an even more daring escape. Lightning struck outside again, and this time, the power flickered and died, stranding me alone in darkness. Steven, I called. Where was my assistant? I decided to call for my 2 security agents. Aster, Matt, no response from any of my team. I would have to reboot the system myself. There was a ringing then, not in my head, but from a phone in the distance. It sounded like a rotary phone, or even an old landline. It sparkled like bells in the rain, and I wondered when we'd installed it. No, nothing in the building was that old. Everything had been updated to modern standards a year ago. As I traversed the building, I found my phone's flashlight option and shone it ahead of me, the glow casting a cool, eerie glow. Something built up in my throat, something I couldn't quite explain. In the distance, the phone continued to ring. I saw movement turning a corner. Steven, I reached, picking up the pace. Is that you? I turned the corner and found another long, winding hallway. I checked my mind to see if I was heading in the right direction. The conduit room. Why we called our mess of electrical switches and machinery the conduit room is a whole other story. In essence, it was a more than complex generator room. Yes, that was Steven all right, walking swiftly down the hall. Why he seemed so intent on fleeing me, though, puzzled me. Steven, I yelled, matching his pace. The old, white-haired man seemed not to hear me and turned right. That isn't the right way to the conduit room. No answer. I chased him, turning to the right only to see nothing. No Steven, just a long, winding hallway lined with boxes of artifacts. I thanked one of the many protection sigils that kept their power from manifesting. I walked down, slowly, making note not to disturb the finely crafted symbols, nor the quickly drawn salt. And there he was, in a corner, staring at a wall. Beyond his body, the ringing of a phone emerged. I was more scared than confused now. Steven, he was calm, collected, and intelligent. He didn't have time for pranks. No, the longer I looked at Steven, the more I realized it wasn't. It had the right form, body, shape, but it seemed just a bit too blurry. This wasn't Steven, this was. I felt a hand on my shoulder. Instinctively I whipped around and threw a punch. I'm so sorry. It was Steven, bewildered at my attack. It's all good, sir, he noted, quickly casting an unseen spell, recovering. You do know this isn't the way to the conduit room. I nodded. I'm aware, Steven, I sighed. Behind me, the phone rang, but when I turned to look at it, nothing was there. I thought you were in front of me. I was following you. That's impossible, he defended. I've been across the building. Just got here. I wondered who I'd been following. Did you see Matt and Aster? In the distance, the opposite hall now, the sound of a shrill ringing resumed. You heard that, right? Steven looked at me with a blank, confused face. Hear what? An old phone ringing. I managed, starting to walk down the hall. The faster we got the lights back up, the more safe I would feel. Let's just get the lights fixed. And with Steven, wandering the halls felt a lot safer. A quick muttering of words, and Steven had cast a spell of light around us. Being in the light with another person was so much better. We encountered Aster a moment later, staring out at a window. Not a false image, like the other Steven, but the real Aster. "Hey," I greeted, tapping her on the shoulder. "What are you looking at?" "Something's wrong," she murmured. "The rain has stopped." And she was right. No rain battered the windows, and no longer could I see the flashes of lightning. "That's a good thing," Steven pointed out. "You're not seeing it," Aster continued. "There's nothing out there." I touched the windows and peered through it. There was nothing but an empty black. A window, I remembered, was supposed to face a street that bustled with life even in the deadest of nights. And, according to my watch, it was 8:30. I unlatched the lock and pulled it open. Or, at least, I tried. Some unseen force was pushing down against me. Steven added his weight, and then the window slid open, and I felt the wind get sucked clean out of my lungs. I could see the wisps of hot air, and an impossibly chilly nothing. I peered out as I recovered. Nothing was there. No street, no cars, just empty, and the ringing of the phone, which came both within and out. "Close it," Aster shrilled. "There's something out there." Her eyes went blank for a second, and I closed the window just as a massive something started to manifest in the horizon. Long, spindly albino legs striking down. "What is that?" I whispered. The leg vanished up into the dead sky. Aster closed her eyes and reached out into the ether, searching for something. I was suddenly glad I didn't have that special connection to the weird. Can't tell, something that isn't entirely tangible. We're still in our world, and yet we have intersected with another. I locked the window shut. No chances here. That's when the lights flickered back on, a light sputtering and whining in the wiring. Steven's spell faded, and I sat down, relieved we were back in the light. Matt must have gotten to the conduit, Steven realized, already starting to head there. We followed, checking the windows as we did. Soon we entered the basement floor, nervously trotting down a flight of stairs. We turned a few more corners and found Matt in the center of a small enclosure, pressing buttons and turning off switches to on. "Aster," he started, a look of bewilderment on his face. "Where have you been?" "I've been upstairs," Aster answered, "with Quentin and Steven." "That's impossible," Matt argued, "because I just saw you in here. I followed you here." "No, I followed Steven," I realized, but it wasn't the real Steven. Steven shrugged in response, no odd experiences having had. Matt told his story then. The lights had dimmed whilst he was heating up his dinner and annoyed with the lukewarm, but still edible pastries he was microwaving, set out to fix the issue. That's when he thought he'd seen Aster walk down the stairs, which would have been impossible considering that Aster, to my knowledge, had been staring out a window and trying to place what exactly had happened. The not Aster seemed blurry, and she didn't seem fully there, Matt noted, echoing the sentiment I had about not Steven. Matt followed Aster into a corner, away from the conduit room, but she, just like Steven, had vanished. Confused and a bit on edge, Matt finally made his way to the conduit and fixed the power, expertly handling the spherical device of the conduit and the wirings, and switch tapped into it. This was when the phone rang. Me and Aster turned to the noise, a room across the conduit. A wooden door separated us and the phone, but its bell-like ringing pierced through. "You hear it too." "Hear what?" Matt blinked, confused, turning to look at the door. "Not you," Aster murmured, nodding. "I hear that too. A phone, one of those old ones, rotary." Gingerly, I exited the room, feeling a distinct chill around me, and tested the door. The door, when I tried previously, had never opened, locked. Now it opened with a creak. The inside of the room was a simple storage room, though not for artifact nor any blessed item. The room, filled with shelves and boxes lined with paper, was merely a storage room for files, data. "I've never been here," I noted, despite the fact it had been across the conduit. This must have been my father's old filing room. My father had been deep in the artifact trade, and I wondered what new data would be gleaned from this discovery. Steven made a noise. "Does that look like anyone we know?" I looked to where he pointed. There was a skeleton, nearly decayed save for only the tiniest bits and pieces of flesh that dangled from it. It leaned back on a chair, as skeleton-like as it, a phone in one hand, a book in the other. Its clothes were ripped and torn, and by the impossible moths that surrounded it I assumed it had been vermin. Nope, he didn't match a description I was familiar with. But then again, my father's files were never too detailed. Aster, born with the gift, reached out and touched. "There's something there, but not something familiar." I stopped as the phone it held shook and started to ring. Stunned, we all fell silent. It rang again. Should I? The thing rang louder, cutting me off. I think you better, Aster suggested. I took the phone from the skeleton's hands, trying to avoid looking into its thin, smiling grin. Hello, I managed, looking at Matt and Steven for help. This is the auction house of Loreno. All three of them made faces. I whispered, what am I supposed to say? And shrugged. Breathing, heavy and labored, appeared on the other end. And then a voice. It was loud. Is this Aster Mills? It was loud enough so that everyone could hear. Who the hell was on the other end? And how did they know Aster? No. What do you want with Aster? There was a pause. Aster looked at me in confusion. But I didn't have answers. Matt, on edge, drew his pistol. Steven turned on his phone. We'd scanned grimoires for him to quickly spellcast. Bring me the canary. The voice seemed shriller, and with a sense of deep, piercing malice. I looked at Aster. She shook her head. I understood. Canaries were a rather old-fashioned way of calling people who had the gift. I suppose this was because they were often used to verify whether a certain artifact was legitimate. No, Aster isn't here. I lied. Who is this? I need to speak to the canary. The phone seemed to vibrate softly as it spoke, spitting and hissing. Bring it to me. There was a soft, fleshy noise then. Don't let her listen to the other voice. I set the phone back down. Aster, do you know who this? I waved my hands around both the skeleton and the phone. Might be. No, she confessed, afraid and confused as the rest of us. I'd never felt this before. I looked at Steven. He opened a bestiary but shook his head. Never heard of an entity that talks through phones. My guess is that it's some sort of spirit. But what spirit would know Aster's name? He studied the skeleton. I don't know who that is. The rain started back up again, and I hoped we were out of the intersection between our world and the other. Matt sighed in relief. I'll go up and see what it's like out there. I asked him if he was going alone. He confirmed and left us. They weren't stupid, but at the same time, I knew Matt was an expert. He could handle himself, and I didn't want to risk the rest of us being discovered if an incursion had happened. Plus, we'd be in touch. We had radios. Just as Matt left the room did the phone ring once again. We ignored it, but with every ring, it crescendoed in volume. Who the hell is this? I snapped, violently snatching it. There was a different sound on the other end, something like the fleshy squelching earlier, but more pronounced, fresher. Who? This? Hell, this was someone or something else. A different, more monotone sound, as if generated by a computer. And it was repeating, mimicking my words. She lies, she is the thing you fear. Or maybe not mimicking. Is this some sort of prank? I guessed, trying to keep it cool. I think you might be looking instead for my father, Anthony. There was a distinct, crisp pause, and a distant laugh that seemed muffled deep underwater. Steven broke the eerie silence. I think I can work some sort of a tracer spell. I nodded, and the man was right on it, whispering words and weaving an invisible web in the air. Help me, the caller screamed, suddenly and slightly less monotone. Please help me. The words sent a shiver down my spine. I can't help you if I don't know who you are. Only the canary can help me. Let me talk to the canary, let me. Its insistence reminded me of a stalker. I decided I wouldn't be giving the phone to Aster, help needed or not. There was something too wrong about the voice. On hanging up, I concluded. Just as I was setting it down, did it scream again. I am going to kill you. And to my horror, something seemed to swirl in Aster's throat, and they coughed and echoed, I'm going to kill you. She shook her head, confused. I don't know what. Let me out, intoned the caller, more fleshy than monotone. Let me out, repeated Aster. Steven, a frightened look in his eyes, spoke. I can't get a trace. Whatever this is, it's going to kill me if you don't. I found my radio and spoke into it. Matt, I need you to get down here now. No answer, merely static. You have, the caller began. Aster repeated, right away, you have. To let me. They were overlapping each other now. Answer the phone. They spoke in unison, my friend. And the caller, let me answer the phone or I die. Steven shook his head. I agreed with him, but neither of us knew what to do. Matt, I radioed. Answer me, damn it. Give me the phone, son of Anthony. Aster's words began to come forward first, outpacing the thing on the other end. Her eyes told me this was not her will, even as she stepped out, trying to hold herself back. Give it or I die. Give it or I die. The caller repeated, malicious. Aster took another hard step forward. Steven hugged Aster from behind, but the thing in control struggled, shouting for help as the caller repeated, where's Matt? Steven wondered. I think I know what this is. Still nothing on Matt's end. What is it? A verse mimic. Steven shouted, trying to speak over Aster. He read from his bestiary. They were first found in coal mines. They stole the voices of the gifted one's canaries and took control. At this, Aster's eyes widened in horror. We need to silence all modes of communication. I got it. I slammed the phone back down, ripped it out of the wall, and threw it on the ground, shattering it. For a moment, Aster fell, relieved, weak. It says here, Steven began, that after taking control they would replace the person entirely and become a true mimic. I sighed in relief and then shouted into the radio, Matt, we're good. Meet us back in here with a glass of elixir for Aster. There was a long static pause, but Steven answered a moment later, all right, I'll be right down there. That's when the look in Aster's eyes and her throat started back up, thrashing against Steven, fighting, and snarling in the voice that was not hers. I am going to kill you. Aster, fight, Steven ordered, struggling as he spoke. Don't let it take over. Matt, I growled. And then I realized the mimic. The static on the radio shifted then, and it spoke with Aster as one. Let me free, help. Help, I am person. I am going to kill her if you don't let me have her. I will. Steven snatched the radio from my hands, threw it and crushed it, ending the speech. But still, Aster struggled against the man, fighting and snarling. Let me free, I am going to. Hold her mouth open, Steven commanded, and I moved, trying to keep her safe, opening her mouth. Steven moved and looked inside. What are you? Steven carefully reached inside. And what the hell is? And from inside her throat pulled out something white, long, and thrashing against him. The worm-like mass struggled as he pulled it out, screeching and speaking the cursed words as he did. That, with a snap, the creature came free, its tiny voice threatening and cursing us. It's over. The man found an old wooden box, threw out its insides, jewels I hope weren't cursed, and stuffed the mimic inside. This was also when Matt entered the room, cheery, and whistling a folk tune I didn't recognize. He seemed oddly upbeat. Hey guys, he greeted. What's with the faces? He looked at Aster, concerned. What happened here? Is Aster okay? No, Aster croaked, voice small, but original. I'll be fine though. Steven handed Matt the phone. Quentin's dad had a reverse mimic trapped in here. I'm guessing it lured us here to take Aster and replace her. That sounded about right. I asked him what we'd seen outside, the intersection between planes. Steven checked the door this time, identifying symbols carved and I'd never noticed. Yeah, these symbols look old and worn. He continued. The mimic must have been fighting to get out for a while. The rain might have heightened its power. That other world, an illusion so that we wouldn't simply leave. Thank God you were here, I thanked, patting his shoulder. You're a godsend, you know that. And then, as a group, we sighed in relief. Disaster had been narrowly avoided, a disaster that had been trapped under our noses for years. My father had been embroiled deep in the black market of the artifact trade. Given his old age at death, I had assumed he hadn't put himself in danger often, but a mimic locked in the auction house under, as Steven later claimed, poorly drawn sigils. Now I wondered how many more secrets lay deep inside the enchanted, eerie place. How many beasts and unfiled things lay, waiting for just the right moment to strike. But life isn't lived by dwelling on the unknown. It's the small moments that count, and personally, I was taking Aster's survival as a win.